Imagine standing at attention for 12 hours straight, your feet burning in polished boots, sweat dripping beneath a ceremonial uniform that weighs more than a small child. Now imagine doing this every single day for 3 years, protecting people who barely notice you exist. Then, one ordinary Tuesday morning, everything you believed about honor, duty, and recognition gets turned completely upside down by 5 simple words that will haunt you forever. This is the true story of Marcus Thompson, a royal guard whose life changed in the most unexpected way when he was ordered to remove the one thing that meant everything to him. What happened next revealed a truth so shocking that it made headlines around the world and changed how we think about the people who serve us in silence. Some stories are about heroes who save the day. Others are about ordinary people who become extraordinary through circumstances beyond their control. This is about something much more powerful. It's about discovering that sometimes the person you think doesn't matter actually matters more than anyone could have imagined. And sometimes the most devastating moment of your life becomes the beginning of something incredible you never saw coming. Marcus Thompson had always been invisible, and he preferred it that way. Standing 6 feet tall with broad shoulders and an unremarkable face, he blended into crowds effortlessly. This quality made him perfect for his job as a royal guard at Kensington Palace, where being noticed usually meant you had done something wrong. Every morning at 5:30, Marcus would wake up in his small apartment in South London. The walls were bare except for a single photograph of his late father in military uniform, and a certificate from the Royal Guard Academy hanging crooked beside his bathroom mirror. He never bothered to straighten it. Details like that seemed pointless when nobody ever visited. The routine never changed. Cold shower, black coffee, 2 pieces of toast with nothing on them because he had learned to appreciate simple things. By 6:45, he was on the tube heading towards central London, reading the same book he had been carrying for 2 months but never seemed to finish. People pushed past him, stepped on his feet, and occasionally bumped into his shoulder without apologizing. Marcus didn't mind. He understood that to most people, he simply didn't exist. The palace grounds came alive at 7 in the morning. Tourists gathered behind the iron gates, cameras ready, hoping to catch a glimpse of royalty. They rarely paid attention to the guards unless they wanted directions or needed someone to pose with for photographs. Marcus had learned to stand perfectly still during these requests, his face expressionless, while strangers draped their arms around him and smiled for pictures they would probably delete within a week. His supervisor, Captain Williams, was a stern man in his 50s who had served the royal family for over 20 years. Williams treated all the guards fairly, but without warmth, as if emotional attachment might somehow compromise their ability to protect the people they served. He spoke in clipped sentences and expected immediate compliance with every order, no matter how small or seemingly insignificant. "Thompson," Williams had said on Marcus's first day 3 years ago, "your job is to be present but not seen, alert but not obvious, and protective but not aggressive. The moment you start thinking you're important is the moment you become useless to us." Marcus had taken these words to heart. He showed up on time, followed orders without question, and never complained about the long hours or the aching feet that came from standing motionless for extended periods. When other guards grumbled about the tourists, the weather, or the endless repetition of their duties, Marcus remained silent. He had learned early in life that complaining rarely improved anything. The medal came after 18 months of perfect service. The Royal Service Medal was a small bronze disc attached to a blue ribbon, awarded to guards who demonstrated exceptional dedication and reliability. Most guards received theirs with pride, pinning them to their uniforms and calling their families to share the news. Marcus had simply nodded when Captain Williams handed him the medal, attached it to his uniform, and returned to his post. He never called anyone about the medal because there wasn't anyone to call. His father had died when Marcus was 16, and his mother had passed away 2 years later. He had no siblings, no close friends, and no romantic relationships that lasted longer than a few awkward dates. The medal was his alone, and somehow that made it more meaningful, not less. What Marcus didn't know was that the medal represented more than just good performance. It was a recognition of something rare and valuable that most people never develop: the ability to be completely reliable without seeking recognition for it. In a world full of people demanding attention for ordinary tasks, Marcus had become extraordinary through his willingness to be unnoticed. The tourists loved taking pictures with him because he never moved, never smiled, and never asked them to hurry up. They saw him as part of the palace's decoration, like the statues or the elaborate gates. But Marcus didn't mind being treated like furniture. There was something peaceful about existing without having to perform or pretend to be someone he wasn't. Children were different from adults. They would stare at Marcus with wide eyes, fascinated by his stillness and the formal way he was dressed. Sometimes they would try to make him laugh by making funny faces or telling jokes their parents couldn't hear. Marcus never broke character, but something inside him always softened when children were around. They saw him as a person playing a role rather than just part of the scenery. One little girl, maybe 6 years old, had approached him during a particularly busy afternoon. Her parents were distracted by their phones, and she had wandered close to Marcus's post near the main entrance. She studied his face for a long moment before reaching into her pocket and pulling out a small piece of candy. "Are you hungry?" she had asked in a whisper. Marcus couldn't respond, but he looked down at her with what he hoped were kind eyes. The girl smiled and placed the candy on the ground near his feet before skipping back to her parents. When his shift ended that evening, Marcus picked up the candy and kept it in his locker. It was still there, wrapped in colorful paper, 3 months later. The other guards respected Marcus, but didn't really know him. He never joined them for drinks after work or participated in the conversations about sports, politics, or their personal lives. When asked direct questions, he would give brief, polite answers and then find a reason to focus on something else. They had stopped trying to include him in social activities, but not out of malice. They simply understood that Marcus preferred to keep to himself. During quiet moments on duty, Marcus would observe the people around him. He noticed things others missed: the way tourists' faces changed when they realized how far they had walked, the anxiety in security personnel's voices when they thought something might be wrong, the careful way the palace staff moved through their daily routines. He had developed an almost supernatural ability to sense when situations were about to become problematic, often positioning himself to help before anyone realized help was needed. This attention to detail had prevented several minor incidents over the years. He had quietly redirected confused tourists who were wandering into restricted areas, noticed when a child had separated from their family, and guided them back, and once spotted a bag left unattended near security checkpoint. He never made a big deal about these interventions, simply handled them efficiently, and returned to his regular duties. Captain Williams had noticed these qualities, though he rarely commented on them directly. Marcus's performance reviews were always excellent, but they were also brief. Reliable, observant, professional were the kinds of words that appeared in his file. They were accurate, but didn't capture the complete picture of what made Marcus valuable. The truth was that Marcus had found something many people spend their entire lives searching for: a sense of purpose that didn't depend on external validation. He protected people and places that mattered, and he did it well. The fact that his contribution went largely unnoticed didn't diminish its importance to him. If anything, it made the work feel more pure and honest. As his 3rd year of service approached, Marcus had settled into a comfortable rhythm. He knew exactly what was expected of him. He was good at his job, and he had carved out a small but stable place in the world. The metal on his uniform had become as much a part of him as his own skin. When he looked in the mirror each morning while getting dressed, seeing it there reminded him that his work had meaning, even if that meaning was largely invisible to everyone around him. But on a Tuesday morning in October, everything Marcus thought he understood about his place in the world was about to change in the most unexpected and devastating way possible. And it would all begin with 5 simple words that would challenge everything he believed about honor, recognition, and the value of quiet service. The morning started like every other morning for the past 3 years. Marcus arrived at the palace at 7:15, exactly 15 minutes before his shift began, and made his way to the guard station to collect his daily assignment. The October air was crisp, and tourists were already gathering outside the gates despite the early hour. Everything seemed perfectly normal. Captain Williams was standing behind the assignment desk with a clipboard in his hand, and an expression Marcus had never seen before. It wasn't anger or disappointment, but something more unsettling, discomfort. Williams had always been direct and confident in his communications with the guards. This morning, he seemed to be choosing his words carefully before speaking them. "Thompson," Williams said, looking down at his clipboard rather than making eye contact. "I need to speak with you privately." Marcus felt his stomach tighten slightly, but he maintained his composure. In 3 years of service, he had never been called for a private conversation. His performance had been consistently excellent. He had never violated protocol, and he couldn't think of any recent incidents that would warrant special attention. Still, he followed Williams into the small office adjacent to the main guard station. The office was cramped and functional with a desk, 2 chairs, and a filing cabinet that looked like it had been installed sometime in the previous century. Williams gestured for Marcus to sit, which was unusual. Normally, guards stood when receiving instruction from their superiors. Marcus remained standing. "Sir, if I may, I prefer to stand," Marcus said politely. Williams nodded and closed the door behind them. The sound of the latch clicking into place seemed unusually loud in the small space. For a moment, neither man spoke. Williams was clearly struggling with whatever he needed to communicate, and Marcus waited patiently for him to find the right words. "Thompson, this is not easy for me to say," Williams began, setting his clipboard on the desk and looking directly at Marcus for the first time. "I've been instructed to ask you to remove your Royal Service Medal." The words hit Marcus like a physical blow, but he managed to keep his expression neutral. He blinked once, slowly, and waited for Williams to continue. There had to be more to this. Perhaps the medal needed to be cleaned or replaced, or maybe there was some kind of administrative update required. "I don't understand, sir," Marcus said quietly. "Is there a problem with the medal itself?" Williams shook his head, and Marcus could see genuine regret in the older man's eyes. "There's no problem with the medal, Thompson. The issue is more complicated than that." Marcus felt his world beginning to shift, like the moment when you realize the ground beneath your feet isn't as solid as you thought it was. The medal wasn't just a piece of metal and ribbon to him. It was proof that his work mattered, that his dedication had been noticed and valued. The idea of removing it felt like being asked to remove part of himself. "Can you tell me why, sir?" Marcus asked, his voice remaining steady despite the turmoil building inside him. Williams picked up his clipboard again and scanned the top page, clearly reading from official instructions. "There has been a complaint filed regarding your receipt of the Royal Service Medal. The complaint alleges that the medal was awarded improperly, and pending a full investigation, you are required to remove it from your uniform immediately." Marcus felt the air leave his lungs. A complaint. Someone had complained about him receiving recognition for his service. In all his time as a guard, he had been nothing but professional, courteous, and dedicated. He had never sought attention, never caused problems, never done anything that would warrant criticism, let alone an official complaint. "Who filed the complaint, sir?" Marcus asked. "I'm not authorized to share that information," Williams replied, though his tone suggested he wished he could provide more details. "The investigation will determine whether the complaint has merit. Until then, the medal must be removed." Marcus looked down at his uniform. The small bronze medal seemed heavier now, more significant than it had ever been before. The idea of unpinning it felt like an admission of guilt for something he couldn't understand. But he also understood that arguing with Williams wouldn't accomplish anything. His supervisor was following orders, just as Marcus always did. "How long will the investigation take?" Marcus asked. "I don't know," Williams admitted. "These things can take weeks, sometimes months." "I am sorry, Thompson. I know how much the medal means to you." Marcus was surprised by this admission. He had never spoken to Williams about what the medal meant to him. He had never spoken to anyone about it. The fact that his supervisor had noticed the medal's importance to him was somehow both comforting and embarrassing. With steady hands, Marcus unpinned the Royal Service Medal from his uniform. The small bronze disc felt cold against his palm as he held it for a moment before placing it on Williams's desk. The space where it had been attached looked wrong now, like a missing tooth in an otherwise perfect smile. "What should I tell people who ask about it?" Marcus asked. "Tell them it's being cleaned or updated," Williams suggested. "No need to go into details about the investigation." Marcus nodded and straightened his uniform. Without the medal, he felt exposed, as if everyone would be able to tell that something important had been taken from him. But he also felt determined not to let this setback affect his work. Whatever the complaint was about, he would prove through his continued service that it was unfounded. "Is there anything else, sir?" Marcus asked. "No, that's all," Williams said. "Your assignment today is the east entrance, same as usual. And Thompson, this doesn't change my opinion of your work. You're still one of our best guards." Marcus appreciated the sentiment, but Williams's words felt hollow given what had just happened. If he truly was one of their best guards, why was someone complaining about his medal? What had he done wrong? Or more troubling, what had someone said he had done wrong? The walk from the office back to the main guard station felt longer than usual. Marcus was acutely aware of his uniform, of the empty space where the medal had been, and of the possibility that his colleagues might notice its absence. He had always prided himself on being invisible, but now he felt like everyone was looking at him. At the east entrance, Marcus took his position and began his shift. The familiar routine of standing at attention, observing the crowds, and maintaining his professional demeanor should have been comforting. Instead, he found himself replaying the conversation with Williams over and over, trying to understand what could have led to this moment. Throughout the morning, tourists approached for the usual photographs and directions. Marcus maintained his composure perfectly, but internally, he was struggling with questions he couldn't answer. Had he somehow offended someone during his duties? Had his dedication been misinterpreted as something inappropriate? Was there some aspect of royal protocol he had misunderstood? The other guards on duty that morning didn't seem to notice anything different about Marcus's appearance. The medal was small enough that its absence wasn't immediately obvious, especially to people who weren't specifically looking for it. This provided some relief, but also highlighted how little attention was generally paid to the details of his service. During his lunch break, Marcus sat alone in the staff canteen, picking at a sandwich he had no appetite for. He watched his colleagues talking and laughing at nearby tables, and for the first time in years, he felt truly isolated. The complaint against him created a barrier between himself and the other guards that hadn't existed before. Even though they didn't know about it, he felt like he was carrying a secret that separated him from them. The afternoon passed slowly. Marcus found himself being extra careful about every interaction, every movement, every decision. If someone was watching him closely enough to file a complaint about his medal, they might be watching for other problems as well. The hypervigilance was exhausting, but he couldn't shake the feeling that he was under scrutiny in a way he had never experienced before. As his shift neared its end, Marcus realized that this day had changed something fundamental about his relationship with his work. The job that had once felt like a calling now felt precarious and uncertain. The medal that had represented recognition for his dedication had become evidence of some unknown wrongdoing. The career that had given his life structure and meaning was now under investigation for reasons he couldn't comprehend. But Marcus was not the type of person to give up easily. As he prepared to leave the palace that evening, he made a silent promise to himself. He would continue to do his job with the same dedication and professionalism he had always shown. He would prove that whatever complaint had been filed against him was unfounded, and he would find a way to earn back the medal that had been taken from him, even if he had to start completely over. What Marcus didn't know was that the truth behind the complaint was more complex and shocking than anything he could have imagined. And the investigation that was about to unfold would reveal secrets that would change not only his own life, but the lives of everyone around him in ways that no one could have predicted. 3 weeks passed without any word about the investigation. Marcus continued his duties with the same precision and dedication he had always shown, but the absence of his medal felt like a constant reminder of his uncertain status. He had developed a habit of unconsciously touching the spot where it used to be, a gesture that served as a painful reminder of what he had lost. The other guards had begun to notice that something was different about Marcus, though they couldn't quite put their finger on what it was. He seemed more withdrawn than usual, if that was even possible, and there was a tension in his posture that hadn't been there before. A few had asked if everything was all right, but Marcus's brief assurances that he was fine had discouraged further inquiry. Captain Williams had been avoiding eye contact with Marcus for most of those 3 weeks. When they did interact, Williams's manner was professional but distant, as if he was trying to maintain appropriate boundaries during an ongoing investigation. Marcus understood the position his supervisor was in, but the change in their relationship added another layer of isolation to his already solitary existence. On a gray Thursday morning in early November, everything changed again. Marcus was at his usual post at the east entrance when he saw Williams approaching with a woman he didn't recognize. She was middle-aged, well-dressed, and carrying a leather briefcase that suggested official business. Her expression was serious, but not unfriendly, and she walked with the confident stride of someone accustomed to handling important matters. "Thompson," Williams said when they reached him. "This is Inspector Sarah Morrison from the Royal Household's Internal Affairs Division. She needs to speak with you about the investigation." Marcus felt his heartbeat quicken, but he maintained his professional composure. After 3 weeks of uncertainty, he was finally going to get some answers about what was happening to him. He was also nervous about what those answers might reveal. "Guard Thompson," Inspector Morrison said, extending her hand for a shake. "I appreciate you taking the time to speak with me. Is there somewhere private where we can talk?" Marcus shook her hand and looked to Williams for guidance. His supervisor nodded toward the same small office where Marcus had been told to remove his medal 3 weeks earlier. The irony of returning to that space wasn't lost on him. Once they were seated in the cramped office, Inspector Morrison opened her briefcase and removed a thick folder. Marcus could see his name written on the tab, and the sight of an official file devoted entirely to him was both strange and unsettling. He had never thought of himself as the type of person who would generate paperwork. "Guard Thompson," Morrison began, consulting the top document in the folder. "I want to start by assuring you that this investigation is not a reflection of any wrongdoing on your part. The complaint that was filed has raised some questions that needed to be addressed, but our preliminary findings suggest that the situation is more complicated than it initially appeared." Marcus felt a small wave of relief, but he remained cautious. The word preliminary suggested that the investigation was ongoing, and he still didn't understand what the original complaint had been about. "Can you tell me what the complaint alleged?" Marcus asked. Morrison nodded and flipped to another page in the folder. "The complaint was filed by someone claiming that your Royal Service Medal was awarded based on false information. Specifically, the complainant alleged that you had misrepresented your background and qualifications when you applied for your position as a Royal Guard." Marcus felt confused rather than relieved. His background check had been thorough when he was hired 3 years ago, and he had never misrepresented anything about himself. If anything, he had probably understated his qualifications rather than exaggerating them. "I don't understand," Marcus said. "I was completely honest during my application process. Everything I told them about my background was true. That's what our investigation has confirmed," Morrison said with a slight smile. "In fact, our review of your file has revealed some interesting information that wasn't fully explored during your original hiring process." She removed another document from the folder and placed it on the desk where Marcus could see it. It appeared to be some kind of military record, but the details were too small for him to read from his position. "Tell me about your father," Morrison said. Marcus was surprised by the question. He had mentioned his father's military service during his job interview, but it had never seemed particularly relevant to his qualifications as a Royal Guard. "He served in the British Army," Marcus said. "He died when I was 16, so I don't know as much about his service as I wish I did. He didn't talk about it much when I was growing up." Morrison nodded and picked up the document she had placed on a desk. Your father was Sergeant James Thompson of the Royal Regiment of Fusiliers. Did you know that he received the Distinguished Service Medal for his actions during the Falklands War? Marcus felt his breath catch in his throat. He had known that his father served during the Falklands conflict, but his father had never mentioned receiving any medals or commendations. The few times Marcus had asked about his military service, his father had changed the subject or given vague answers about doing his duty. "No," Marcus said quietly. "He never told me about any medals." According to these records, your father was instrumental in saving the lives of several wounded soldiers during an enemy attack. His actions were considered heroic, but he apparently never spoke about them publicly. The medal was awarded posthumously after a review of the incident several years after the war ended. Marcus stared at the document, trying to process this information about his father. It explained some things about the man. He remembered the quiet dignity, the reluctance to talk about his military service, the way he had taught Marcus about duty and responsibility without making a big show of it. "I still don't understand what this has to do with the complaint about my medal," Marcus said. Morrison smiled more broadly now, and Marcus could see that she was building towards something significant. "The person who filed the complaint was someone who knew your father during his military service. They recognized your last name and did some research into your family background. What they discovered made them question whether you had been given proper recognition for your own service." Marcus felt lost. Nothing Morrison was saying made sense in the context of a complaint about his medal being awarded improperly. If anything, the information about his father seemed to support his own qualifications rather than undermine them. "I'm afraid I don't follow," Marcus admitted. Morrison reached into her briefcase again and removed what appeared to be a newspaper clipping. She placed it on the desk next to the military record, and Marcus could see that it was from a local London paper dated about 18 months ago. "Do you remember this incident?" Morrison asked, pointing to the headline of the article. Marcus leaned forward to read the headline: "Tourist Family Saved from Traffic Accident Near Kensington Palace." As he read the first few lines of the article, memories of that day came flooding back. A family with young children had been crossing a busy street near the palace when a distracted driver had run a red light. Marcus had seen what was about to happen and had stepped into traffic to pull the family to safety. "I remember," Marcus said, "but I don't see what this has to do with anything. I was just doing my job." According to witnesses quoted in this article, you risked your own life to save that family. The driver's car missed you by inches. But when the reporters tried to interview you afterward, you refused to give your name or make any statements. You just returned to your post as if nothing had happened. Marcus remembered that part too. The last thing he had wanted was publicity or attention for doing what any reasonable person would have done in that situation. The family was safe, and that was all that mattered to him. The person who filed the complaint, Morrison continued, was a member of that family. They had been trying to find you for months to thank you properly, but you had been so adamant about remaining anonymous that they couldn't track you down. When they finally identified you and learned about your medal, they realized that your act of heroism had never been officially recognized. Marcus felt the world shifting around him again, but this time in a completely different direction. The complaint hadn't been about him receiving recognition he didn't deserve. It had been about him not receiving the recognition he should have gotten. They weren't trying to take your medal away, Morrison explained. They were trying to get you a bigger one. The complaint they filed was that your Royal Service Medal was insufficient recognition for someone who had risked his life to save civilians. They wanted the palace to investigate whether you deserved a higher honor. Marcus sat in silence for a long moment, trying to absorb this information. For 3 weeks, he had been tormented by the idea that his service had been called into question. The reality was that someone had been fighting to get him more recognition, not less. "What happens now?" Marcus asked. Morrison closed the folder and looked at him with an expression that was both professional and genuinely warm. "Now we finish our investigation and make our recommendations. But I can tell you unofficially that the family who filed the complaint has provided compelling evidence that your actions that day went far beyond normal duty requirements. Combined with your exemplary service record and your family's history of military service, there's a strong case to be made for additional recognition. Marcus felt overwhelmed by this turn of events. He had spent 3 weeks believing that his career was under threat, only to discover that someone was actually advocating for him to receive greater honors. The irony was almost too much to process. "Will I be able to wear my Royal Service Medal again?" Marcus asked. "Absolutely," Morrison said. "In fact, you should have it back by tomorrow. And depending on how our final report is received, you might be wearing something else alongside it very soon." As Marcus left the office that day, he felt like he was walking in a dream. The investigation that had seemed like a nightmare was actually the beginning of something he had never dared to imagine. But more importantly, he had learned something about his father that changed how he understood his own commitment to service. The quiet heroism that had defined his father's military career had apparently been passed down to him, even though neither of them had ever spoken about it directly. And now, for the first time in his life, that heroism was about to be recognized in a way that would change everything. The next morning, Marcus woke up before his alarm for the first time in months. The anxiety that had been his constant companion for the past 3 weeks had been replaced by something he hadn't expected: curiosity. Inspector Morrison's revelation had answered some questions, but raised many others. Who was the family that had filed the complaint? How had they managed to track him down after 18 months? And, most intriguingly, what did they remember about that day that he had tried so hard to forget? Captain Williams was waiting for Marcus when he arrived at the palace, holding a small velvet box that Marcus recognized immediately. His Royal Service Medal had been returned, exactly as Morrison had promised. But Williams's expression suggested that this was only the beginning of a much larger conversation. "How are you feeling, Thompson?" Williams asked as he handed over the medal box. "Better, sir," Marcus replied, pinning the medal back to his uniform. The familiar weight of it felt comforting, like putting on a piece of clothing that had been missing from his wardrobe. Inspector Morrison explained what the investigation was really about. Williams nodded and gestured toward his office. "There's more you need to know. The family who filed the complaint has requested to meet with you, and there's some details about that day that you should understand before you decide whether to accept their invitation." Marcus followed Williams into the office, wondering what else he could possibly learn about an incident that he remembered clearly. He had acted on instinct that day, doing what seemed necessary without thinking about the consequences. The idea that there were additional details he wasn't aware of seemed unlikely. Williams opened a file folder and removed several photographs. These were taken by a security camera across the street from where the incident occurred. "We didn't review them at the time because there was no need for an investigation. The family was safe, you returned to duty, and everyone moved on. But when the complaint was filed, we had to gather all available evidence." Marcus looked at the first photograph and immediately understood why Williams had wanted to prepare him. The image showed Marcus stepping into the street as the car approached, but from this angle, it was clear just how close he had come to being killed. The car's front bumper was only inches from his body as he pushed the last family member out of the way. "I knew it was close," Marcus said quietly, "but I didn't realize it was this close." The next photograph shows the aftermath, Williams continued, placing another image in front of Marcus. This picture showed Marcus standing in the street, his uniform disheveled, talking to the family he had just saved. But what struck Marcus most was the expression on his own face. He looked shaken in a way that he didn't remember feeling at the time. The adrenaline of the moment had apparently masked the full impact of what had almost happened to him. "The father of the family is named David Chun," Williams explained. "He's a photographer who works for several London newspapers. After you saved his family, he became obsessed with finding you. He felt that your refusal to give your name or accept thanks was somehow wrong. He wanted to repay you, but more than that, he wanted to understand why you had risked your life for strangers and then disappeared without seeking any recognition." Marcus studied the photographs more carefully. He could see David Chun in the background of one image, his camera hanging around his neck, his face a mixture of gratitude and confusion as Marcus walked away from the scene. "Mr. Chin spent months investigating the incident," Williams continued. "He interviewed witnesses, reviewed security footage from multiple angles, and eventually tracked down enough information to identify you. What he discovered convinced him that your actions that day represented the kind of heroism that should be officially recognized. Williams removed another document from the folder. This is Mr. Chin's written statement about what he observed that day. I think you should read it before you decide whether to meet with his family. Marcus took the document and began reading. Chin's account of the incident was far more detailed and dramatic than Marcus's own memories. According to Chin, Marcus had assessed the situation, calculated the trajectory of the approaching car, and positioned himself in exactly the right place to push the family to safety while minimizing his own risk. The statement described Marcus's actions as displaying extraordinary courage, tactical awareness, and selfless dedication to protecting civilians. He makes it sound like I'm some kind of trained hero, Marcus said after finishing the statement. I just reacted to what was happening. That's exactly what makes it heroic, Williams replied. You didn't think about yourself, you didn't hesitate, and you didn't expect anything in return. According to several witnesses, including a retired police officer who was walking nearby, your actions prevented what would have been a fatal accident. Marcus set down the statement and looked at Williams directly. What does Mr. Chin want from me now? He wants to thank you properly, along with his wife and children. But more than that, he wants to understand who you are and why you acted the way you did. His investigation into your background led him to information about your father's military service, and he believes there's a pattern of unrecognized heroism in your family that deserves to be acknowledged. The mention of his father brought back memories of Inspector Morrison's revelations about the Distinguished Service Medal. Marcus was still processing the fact that his father had been decorated for heroism, but had never mentioned it. The parallel between his father's reluctance to seek recognition and his own behavior was becoming increasingly clear. What kind of meeting are they proposing? Marcus asked. Williams consulted his notes. A private meeting, just you and the Chun family. They suggested meeting at a restaurant or cafe somewhere neutral, not at the palace or their home. Mr. Chen emphasized that they don't want to cause you any discomfort or publicity. They just want to have a conversation. Marcus thought about this carefully. For 18 months, he had successfully avoided any follow-up to the incident that had apparently defined him as a hero in other people's minds. Meeting with the Chun family would force him to confront the reality of what he had done and how it had affected the people he had saved. But it might also help him understand why his actions had resonated so strongly with people who didn't even know him. There's something else, Williams added. The investigation into your case has attracted attention from higher levels within the royal household. There's talk of nominating you for the Royal Victorian Medal for your service record and particularly for your actions that day. The meeting with the Chen family isn't required for that process, but their testimonial would certainly support the nomination. Marcus felt his pulse quicken. The Royal Victorian Medal was one of the highest honors that could be awarded to someone in his position. It was recognition that went far beyond anything he had ever imagined receiving. But the prospect of such recognition also made him uncomfortable in ways he couldn't fully articulate. I need some time to think about the meeting, Marcus said. Of course, Williams replied. But I should mention that Mr. Chin's investigation uncovered something else that might interest you. He found records of other incidents over the past 3 years where you've gone beyond your normal duties to help people. Things that never made it into official reports because they seemed too minor to document. Williams handed Marcus a list that Chun had apparently compiled. Marcus read through it with growing amazement. Someone had been paying attention to small acts of kindness and assistance that he had completely forgotten about. Helping an elderly tourist who had fallen near the palace gates, staying late to help locate a child's lost toy, directing a lost family to their hotel during a particularly busy weekend. Mr. Chin believes that these incidents, combined with the traffic accident, demonstrate a pattern of behavior that reflects exceptional character and dedication to service. His complaint wasn't just about one incident. It was about 3 years of service that he felt had gone unrecognized. Marcus stared at the list, wondering how someone he had never met could have documented his actions more thoroughly than he had documented them himself. The idea that his daily work had been observed and valued by a complete stranger was both touching and slightly overwhelming. "I'll meet with them," Marcus said finally, "but I want to understand what they're really looking for from this conversation." William smiled for the first time since the whole investigation had begun. "I think they're looking for the same thing you've been looking for your whole life, Thompson. They want to understand what it means to do the right thing without expecting anything in return." As Marcus left Williams's office that morning, he realized that the upcoming meeting with the Chun family would be more than just an opportunity to receive thanks for his actions. It would be a chance to understand how his quiet approach to service had affected other people in ways he had never considered. And it might help him figure out how to handle the recognition that was apparently coming his way, whether he wanted it or not. The investigation that had begun as his worst nightmare was transforming into something that could change his life in ways he was only beginning to understand. But first, he needed to meet the people whose lives he had saved and learn what they had seen in him that he had never seen in himself. The cafe Marcus had chosen for the meeting was small and quiet, tucked away on a side street near Covent Garden where they were unlikely to be disturbed. He arrived 15 minutes early, partly out of habit and partly because he was nervous about this conversation in a way that standing guard at the palace had never made him nervous. Protecting people was something he understood. Being thanked by them was completely unfamiliar territory. David Chun arrived with his wife Sarah and their two children, Emma and James, who appear to be about 8 and 6 years old. Marcus recognized them immediately from that day 18 months ago, though the children had grown considerably since then. David approached the table with a confident stride, but his expression showed the same mixture of gratitude and curiosity that Marcus had noticed in the security camera photographs. "Mr. Thompson," David said, extending his hand, "thank you so much for agreeing to meet with us. I'm David Chun, and this is my wife Sarah and our children Emma and James." Marcus shook hands with each family member, noting that the children looked at him with wide eyes, as if they weren't quite sure what to expect from this meeting. Sarah Chun seemed more emotional than her husband, her eyes bright with unshed tears as she took Marcus's hand. "We've been waiting so long to thank you properly," Sarah said. "What you did that day, we think about it constantly. We owe you everything." Marcus felt uncomfortable with this level of gratitude, but he tried to respond gracefully. "I'm glad everyone was safe. That's what mattered most." As they settled around the table, David pulled out a small notebook that appeared to be filled with questions and observations he had prepared for this meeting. Marcus realized that David had approached this conversation with the same methodical thoroughness he had brought to his investigation of the incident. "Can I ask you something that's been bothering me since that day?" David began. "Why did you refuse to give your name or accept thanks? Most people who do something heroic want some recognition for it." Marcus considered this question carefully. It was something he had been thinking about himself since learning about the investigation. "I suppose I didn't think of what I did as heroic. I saw a dangerous situation developing, and I acted to prevent people from getting hurt. That seemed like something anyone would do." "But anyone didn't do it," Sarah interjected gently. "There were probably 30 people on that street who saw what was about to happen. You were the only one who stepped into traffic to help us." This was a point Marcus hadn't fully considered. He had been so focused on the immediate situation that he hadn't paid attention to the other people nearby. The idea that others had witnessed the danger but hadn't acted made his own response seem more significant than he had realized. "Tell me about your father," David said, consulting his notebook. "My research into your background turned up some interesting information about his military service." Marcus felt a familiar tightness in his chest when his father was mentioned, but he also felt curious about what David had discovered. "What did you find?" "Your father received the Distinguished Service Medal for actions during the Falklands War, but it wasn't awarded until several years after his death. It seems like he never sought recognition for what he did, just like you didn't seek recognition for saving us." Marcus nodded slowly. "I only learned about my father's medal a few weeks ago, during the investigation. He never mentioned it to me." "That makes perfect sense," David said with enthusiasm. "I think you inherited more than just his sense of duty. You inherited his belief that doing the right thing doesn't require public recognition." Emma, The 8-year-old daughter had been listening quietly to this conversation. Suddenly, she looked directly at Marcus and asked, "Are you a superhero?" The question caught Marcus off guard, and he found himself smiling for the first time since the meeting began. "No, I'm not a superhero. I'm just a person who has a job protecting other people." "But superheroes protect people too," Emma pointed out with a logical directness that only children possess. "That's true," Marcus admitted. "But superheroes have special powers. I don't have any special powers." "Yes, you do," James, the 6-year-old, chimed in. "You can see when bad things are going to happen before they happen. That's a special power." Marcus looked at David and Sarah, who were both smiling at their children's perspective on the situation. Out of the mouths of babes, Marcus thought. The children had identified something that the adults had been trying to articulate more carefully. "The kids have a point," David said. "What you did that day required you to assess a complex situation very quickly and respond perfectly. That's not a skill everyone has." "It's more than that," Sarah added. "When I think back to that day, what I remember most is how calm you were. Even after you had risked your life to save us, you seemed completely composed. You checked to make sure we were all okay. You made sure we got safely to the sidewalk, and then you just went back to your post as if nothing unusual had happened." Marcus remembered that part of the incident clearly. Once the immediate danger had passed, his main concern had been returning to his duties without causing a disruption. He had been worried that Captain Williams would be upset about him leaving his post, even though the circumstances had clearly justified his actions. "Can I show you something?" David asked, reaching into his briefcase. He removed a large envelope and pulled out what appeared to be a professionally printed photograph. The image showed Marcus in mid-action, pushing Sarah and the children out of the path of the oncoming car. But this wasn't one of the security camera photos Marcus had seen. This was a high-quality shot that captured the intensity and determination on his face as he acted to save the family. "I took this picture," David explained. "I'm a photographer, and my camera was around my neck when the accident happened. I snapped this shot instinctively, without even thinking about it. When I developed it later, I realized I had captured something extraordinary." Marcus studied the photograph with fascination. Seeing himself from this perspective, frozen in a moment of action, helped him understand why other people viewed the incident differently than he did. The person in the photograph looked focused and determined, someone who was fully committed to protecting others regardless of the personal cost. "I've shown this photograph to several colleagues in the journalism business," David continued. "Everyone who sees it has the same reaction. They want to know who you are and why you acted the way you did. That's why I became so determined to find you." Sarah leaned forward in her chair. "We need you to understand something, Mr. Thompson. That day changed our lives in ways you probably can't imagine. It wasn't just that you saved us from being hit by the car. It was that you showed our children what it looks like when someone puts other people's safety before their own safety. Emma and James talk about you all the time," she continued. "They call you the Brave Guard, and they've made up stories about you helping other people. You've become their example of what it means to be a good person." Marcus felt overwhelming emotions building inside him, but he managed to maintain his composure. The idea that his actions had had such a lasting impact on the children was both humbling and inspiring. "There's one more thing we need to tell you," David said, his tone becoming more serious. "The investigation that resulted from our complaint has led to some significant developments. We've been told that you're being considered for the Royal Victoria Medal." Marcus nodded. "Captain Williams mentioned that possibility. What he probably didn't tell you is that we've been asked to provide a formal testimonial about your actions. We want to make sure you're comfortable with us sharing our full account of what happened that day." Marcus considered this request. The idea of his actions being documented in official royal records was intimidating, but he also recognized that the Chun family deserved the opportunity to tell their story in their own words. "I would be honored to have you share your account," Marcus said. David smiled and closed his notebook. "Then, there's something else you should know. The ceremony for the Royal Victorian Medal is scheduled for next month. The family members of recipients are traditionally invited to attend." Marcus felt a pang of sadness as he realized that his parents wouldn't be there to see him receive such recognition. But then he looked around the table at the Chun family, who had become invested in his story in a way that his own family never had the chance to be. "Would you consider allowing us to attend the ceremony?" Sarah asked quietly. "You saved our family, and watching you receive the recognition you deserve would mean everything to us." Marcus felt tears building in his eyes, but he managed to keep them from falling. "I would like that very much." As they prepared to leave the cafe, Emma approached Marcus with something in her hand. She held out a small drawing that showed a figure in a guard's uniform standing in front of a palace, with a medal prominently displayed on his chest. "I made this for you," she said shyly. "It's you being brave." Marcus accepted the drawing with hands that trembled slightly. In all his years of service, he had never received anything that meant as much to him as this simple picture drawn by a child whose life he had helped save. 1 month later, Marcus stood in the grand ballroom of Buckingham Palace, wearing his dress uniform with both his Royal Service Medal and his new Royal Victorian Medal displayed proudly on his chest. As his name was called, and he stepped forward to receive official recognition for his service, he spotted the Chun family in the audience, watching with the same gratitude and admiration they had shown in the cafe. But Marcus also noticed something else that day. Throughout the ceremony, other recipients of medals and honors approached him to express their respect for his actions. Word had spread through the palace community about the guard who had risked his life to save strangers and then tried to disappear without recognition. His quiet heroism had become legendary among people who understood the true meaning of service. After the ceremony, as Marcus posed for official photographs with his medal, he thought about his father and the Distinguished Service Medal that had been awarded posthumously. He finally understood why his father had never spoken about his own heroism. The recognition wasn't the point. The service itself was the reward. But Marcus also understood something his father might not have realized. Sometimes accepting recognition gracefully is another form of service. By allowing his actions to be celebrated, Marcus was giving other people permission to believe in the possibility of heroism in everyday life. The investigation that had begun with someone questioning whether Marcus deserved his Royal Service Medal had ended with him receiving one of the highest honors available to someone in his position. But more importantly, it had helped him understand that the quiet, unnoticed service he had always provided was actually visible to the people who mattered most, the ones whose lives had been touched by his dedication to protecting others. As Marcus returned to his regular duties the following week, he wore both medals with a new understanding of what they represented. They weren't just recognition for past actions. They were a promise to continue serving with the same integrity and commitment that had defined his father's military career and his own journey as a royal guard. The complaint that had once threatened to destroy his career had instead revealed the true impact of his service. And the recognition he had never sought had become a responsibility he was proud to carry forward.